Okay, guys, so let's see what we've learned till today. So now in the past few videos, we understood about the basics of React. We set up our basic React. We saw and created our basic structure of how our tic-tac-toe game is to be. Okay. And we saw that what a functional component is. Okay. It returns what you want to see on the screen. So I want to see a div, name the class name, and inside that I want to see another component. Components are basically small isolated pieces of code which can be reused. So it makes code reusability a lot and flexibility a lot better. Okay. And then we saw that inside this component, we saw another game component. Now the game component again had a return method. Now the return method again is what you want to see on the screen. So I want to see a div with the class name of game, inside which I want to see another div which has a class name of game board and it has a board component inside of it. And I need another div with the game info inside of it. Okay. And now this is a class-based component, and we'll be working on our square.js, and we're going to be enhancing our properties of a square, and we're going to see why we use class-based components and what are the benefits of it. Again, if you're seeing this video now when I'm recording it in 2020, class-based components are still good and still used, but now we have something called React hooks, which basically give us all the functionality of class-based components, the access to all the lifecycle methods, but using functional components. And they are a lot easier and more flexible to use. But I want you to learn the basics before, you can't just jump and start doing extremely advanced stuff until you know the basics, and your roots should always be strong. So we're going to be learning the basics, and be making future videos and explaining how to use React hooks and how to move away from class-based components to functional components. Okay. So now that we have our basics, now how do we pass data from one component to the other? So now to pass data from one component to the other, we use something called props. So we're going to be learning that today. So as I said, we're going to be working on the square part of the square component today. So you can see that this render square method is I'm passing in numbers. Now these are basically the square number. Okay. So why I'm doing this, I wanted to show you guys how to use props. Okay. So, and to identify each square. So inside square, I am going to give it a value. What should we name it? Let's give it a value. Let's just give it value. Value equals to, and I want to give it the value whatever I pass in. So I want to give it a value of I. Okay. So now since this syntax is JSX. Okay. Now JSX is the JavaScript syntax, which further gets converted into your basic HTML components using react.createElement. It's a function, so it will take this square, and then it's going to convert all this information into a square into your basic HTML. And how all that, if you want your more in-depth knowledge, I recommend you go to reactjs.org. But for as a beginner, I don't want to go so deep and make this video long and boring. So I'm just going to the basics. So now to pass in props, you give it a key and a value. Now inside JSX, if ever you want to use JavaScript, you need to give these curly braces. So here I could have given I could give a function, a statement, expression saying I+1 or whatever. Any JavaScript code can be executed inside these two braces. Okay. So inside JSX, if you want to give any JavaScript code, this. So like inside this return function, if inside here, if I want to give any variable, say if something, so and if statement and all, any JavaScript, I need to put curly braces. Cool. So people use this. We also might use this maybe for conditional rendering, that if the value right now is greater than 1, then you show this particular div or you don't show it. Okay. So for that, you can use curly braces there and put an if statement. Okay, so to square, I'm passing a prop name called value, and its value is going to be I. So every time this function is called, we're going to have 9 different squares with from starting from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. We missed 3. Okay, we found another bug. 4, 5, 6, 7. Or should we start with 1? Actually, we'll start with 1. We close that. So we're going to start with 1. We're going to go 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Yeah. So we pass the square a value of I, and here now in this to do what I want to print the value of I. So we're going to give this dot props, so that we need to give this dot props because props is the variable which is going to hold all this information that is passed in. Okay, this is a special variable and it's going to hold all your key value pairs that are passed in. So this dot props, this refers to the current components props, and this dot props dot whatever we gave there. So here if you see board.js, we gave it value, the key of value. So we're going to just type this dot props dot value. All right. So now if we come back here, you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have 1 to 9 written. Okay, so this is how you pass data from one component to the other. Now this is in a top-down hierarchy. You can't pass anything from square back to board. Okay, you can only pass in from some main component that is rendering a child component. Okay, so board is rendering square, so you can pass information to it, but you can't pass any information back from square to board. If you want to do that, we'll be seeing how to do that. But for now, let's just create a square. Okay, so now that we have all our props and we have our values and they're being displayed. So now let's make it more interactive. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an on click. Okay, so what we want to happen when we click on this button. So we're going to add on click equals to, and we're going to give in a function. So we're going to give in an arrow function. So this is JavaScript ES6 functionality that you can define your functions by basically giving an empty parenthesis arrow, and then what you want to happen, what you want to return from that function. So I want to return an alert that says clicked. Okay, and I'm just going to make this capital C. So now what is going to happen is whenever I click on one of the buttons, it's going to display an alert called click. So let's just test this out. Let's say I click on 1, it says clicked. Click on 6, it says clicked, and so on. All right. Okay, so now that we have our functionality, what we want to do is we want to make the component remember, the square component remember that it was clicked or not. Now in order to remember stuff, square component uses its own state, okay, a variable called state, and we can set the state whenever it is clicked so that it will display the value of the state. And state is used in components to remember if it was clicked or any other information. Like if you have a counter, you keep clicking +1. If you keep clicking a button, you can keep incrementing the count and displaying it, and it will remember that this is the current count, and you can do +1 and you can get the next count. All right, so what we're going to do is first we're going to pull up a constructor here. Constructor. Okay, and in the constructor, we're going to create first a variable called this.state, and we're going to make the state as an empty, passing it a value null. Okay, so the initial value for initial, so this is our initial state, and it has got a variable called value, and the initial value that we want, it's supposed to be null. Okay, now whenever you call the constructor on your own component, you should always call super and pass in props. So this will call basically the constructor method of your component class and give it the props. So this is always this should always be done, or you're going to get errors. And props here as well. Okay, so whenever we are rendering this component, we want the constructor to be passed props. We need to call super.props, and then we need to initialize a state of null, the state with a value called null. Okay, Now what we want to do is whenever we click a square, I want to set this dot set state. Now you can't directly manipulate state, so instead we have to use a function called this dot set state. And now inside the set state, what I want to do is I want to pass in the value. So I'm going to pass in the new value of the state that I want. Okay, so I want to change the value keyword and I want to make it x. Okay, so now every time I click on a button, it is going to change. Initially is going to be null and then it's going to change to x. Okay, and then what do I want to display inside that button? I want to display the value of the state, right? So that if it is clicked or not. So we're going to just change from props to state. So now what we've done is we've changed our function, our class-based component, that instead of rendering what was passed in through the props, is going to render what is in its state. Okay, so if it's not clicked, it's going to be null. This is going to be null, and this button is going to be empty. It's going to be an empty square. If it is clicked, it's going to change the value to x, and we are reading this state dot value, so it's going to become x. All right. So let's check this out. So right now you can see it's null. If I click, it becomes x. If I click, it becomes x. If I click, it becomes x. Awesome. All right. So we have created our square component. Now what we want to do is we don't want everything to be crosses, right? We want cross and knots. Okay, so in the next video we're going to basically lifting up our state, and instead of having this information stored in each square, we're going to be have it stored at the board level, so that we can manipulate and we can check every time somebody clicks the function, clicks a square, if somebody won the game or not. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention is every time the value of state or props changes, React will re-render the whole component. So every time I'm clicking the square, React is basically re-rendering this square. Okay, and so once I start maintaining this information at the board level, every time I click a square, React is going to re-render the board, because the state information is going to be maintained at the board. And then React also is going to be re-rendering each of the child elements by default. Okay, so all these elements are going to get re-rendered once we change the board value. So we'll be seeing this in the next video. All right, so stay tuned. Next video coming up. Thank you, guys.
Like, share, subscribe. Press the bell icon and follow us on Instagram to get notifications for our latest videos.